Hello, Mr. Alberto here, and want to show something that I found with the data viewer in Wind Waker HD, and some weird things with interactions with blackwind that I don't really understand why they are, but basically the gist is that I'm thinking the data viewer is not 100% accurate on showing the angles of the sticks, the actual angles that you're holding. I think they're an approximation, but I think there are some inaccuracies, and I would like to show off some of the glaring mistakes in the data viewer, and showing that, especially when it comes to, there's some angles that are not red, that should be red. And so the main part I'm going to show, so this is I'll show the right stick. The left stick should be exactly the same, but basically, you can see, the first thing I notice is that 128, so you see 128, 128, that's the main stick. That is holding nothing on the stick. And so if you see, if I barely move the stick, see I'm barely moving it, it takes a little bit, I can barely move it some, and nothing happens. It still stays at 128. See, I'm barely moving it, and that doesn't show until I move it a little bit, and then you could see I barely move the stick from here and it picks it up. So it seems like there's an extra dead zone that is not picked up on data viewer. Basically, a dead zone is where if you hold multiple angles, it still reads the same angle. And so, basically, there's a larger dead zone than what the data viewer is actually picking up. Because you can see I can hold up to, you can see the character. When the character starts moving is where I'm no longer holding neutral. So you can see I hit 129, the character's still not moving. And then it goes up to, I think, a 136, 135. So, the dead zone, apparent dead zone, as in what the data viewer is telling me, the dead zone should be 135, which is 7 units off 128. But it turns out that there are actually more values that are not being read. So, there are not actually 128 values on the stick. There are more than that. It's just that either they are being picked up by the game, but not being picked up by the data viewer, or it's a physical dead zone that does not transmit to the game. Basically, the controller is not reading these values, so it's not even sending them to the system. It's just saying it's all neutral. So, but then there's a really weird interaction that happens that kind of makes me think that it's not that it's not that the gamepad's not reading these values, because there's another thing called, we like to call blackwind. It's a really silly name to me, but the name stuck. And what blackwind means is you're holding an off angle on the stick. If you hold A, B, start, and select, or you restart the controller, well, that's the way to restart it. You see, it just goes right back to neutral if you hold it for like 3 seconds. And now, I'm not holding anything on the right stick, and he's just going to the right. And so, basically, the reason this is important is that there's a setup for unbuffered manual swim in SD, where you flick back and forth, and you try to operate direct, like just a little bit out of neutral, outside of neutral. And the point of that is to make it so that you don't hit neutral, but you're still able to alternate between up and down. But the interesting thing is that on HD, blackwind seems to work a little differently if the data viewer is accurate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it directly outside of neutral. So I'll hold it maybe 141. That's pretty close to neutral. That's ESS. And I'm going to reset the stick. And you're going to see, so once it snaps back to neutral, so now it's snapped back. Now if I'm not holding any stick direction, the first thing I notice that's weird is that the game still thinks that I'm holding neutral. Which doesn't make sense because I stored ESS as the default position. However, the game still thinks I'm holding neutral, which doesn't make sense because I very severely miscalibrated the controller by 13 units. So you would think that right now the game would be reading 141 in the opposite direction, but it doesn't. So that's the first weird thing. The second weird thing is that if I go directly up on the stick, it goes to 101. So I'm holding, maybe it's not perfectly directly up. I don't have a notch, but I'm pretty decent at holding up. And it's going to 95. And I obviously didn't set 95 on the stick. Now it's showing 112. it's kind of off. So you could see that if I move the stick barely, the position changes a lot. I guess it's now it's actually holding the correct blackwind, which is good. But sometimes it doesn't always do that. That might just be a, because of the control stick. If you barely move it, you see that the stick moves a lot. But the weirdest thing is that if you hold directly up, it doesn't stay at the same Y position. As you move the control stick up, it goes further and further out, rather than staying at the same position. So this, to me, like, it screams that there are angles not being read correctly from the data viewer. So basically, the gist of all this is don't trust the data viewer, because it will lie in some ways. Basically, perfect up and perfect down are not correct. They're a little off. Maybe they're not necessarily off, but there are values not being read. So you could be in neutral, or you could be a little bit outside of neutral, and it doesn't read it. So, like, when you're trying to calibrate a controller, right? You saw that if I barely moved the stick, it would change the value a little bit. But now I'm barely moving the stick, and nothing happens. I'm staying in 128. So basically, the gist of this is that the data viewer is not reading certain values. There are certain values in the dead zone of the controller that are not read by the data viewer. And the other thing is that there might be a dead zone in XY that we haven't found yet. There might be one in 128. We don't really know. But basically, this kind of helps straighten out the whole idea that unbuffered is impossible on HD, because the dead zone's a lot bigger than we thought it was. We thought the dead zone was tiny, because, like, look, this is ESS right here, and look how close it is to neutral. Well, it turns out that I'm actually holding way further away from neutral than the stick is saying. Like, I'm holding right here. I'm holding halfway on the stick right now, and it says that that's ESS. So basically, yeah, the dead zone is a lot bigger on HD. The data viewer isn't lying, and I hope maybe it's possible for us to get an update to the data viewer that either accounts for this lack of information being sent from the gamepad, or it possibly already picks that up and expands the amount of values that are actually being read, because there's a lot of them that the data viewer just does not show. There's a lot more than 128 values on the stick. There's many, many more that we just don't see. So that's going to do it for me. Just wanted to show off this oddity that I found, and maybe clear up some of the information explaining why is unbuffered not possible on HD, but it is possible on SD. And this probably could lead to maybe a more accurate data viewer that shows all the values and explains how recalibrating the controller actually works, because it doesn't make sense that as you go further away from neutral, you don't keep the same X or Y value if you're going directly up, right? Because going directly up on the stick should keep the same X value. That's what it normally does. But if you have blackwind, it seems to just go further away to the left, further away to the right as you go away from neutral, which makes it hard for you to alternate between up and down, because you're alternating between, like, very far up right and very far down right. So yeah, that is it for me. Hope that helped explain things more. And that's it. See you.